Great Wednesday. Welcome to the Fully Human Connections podcast. I'm your host, King, and I'm joined by my co-host, Reggie. How you doing today, Reggie?
Doing well, King. As always, happy to be here chatting with you on a Wednesday morning.
Same here, same here. So, as we like to get things started with, what's your spiritual energy number today?
And I'm a 10. I had a good morning. I really didn't have to choose it. It was the 10 was just there. I'm working on some projects, and then I get to take a break from my projects, which are directly related to what we're doing, and talk to you about it. So it doesn't get too much better from a personal or professional standpoint for me.
All right, excellent. I'm a 10 as well. I got up this morning and even though I didn't get much sleep last night, I think I probably got about an hour and a half or 2 hours of sleep at most.
Mm.
You know, but I got up this still got up at 6 and went and worked out and got a walk in. So I'm at a 10. I was going to choose to be a 10 regardless, but those really help put me, that make it much easier to be operating that frequency. So I don't have to fight to be a 10. I could just live a 10 pretty much unconsciously, like really make that my default. So that's where I am as well. And now shifting into our next level of, speaking of which, our gratitude. And
Mm.
I go first and say I'm grateful for my life, my health, my ability to see, hear, walk, talk, stand, breathe, and have a sound mind. Grateful for a mother who has sound mind and still loving spirit, and just watching her get old and older,
Mm.
but still blessed that she's here. So, I see so many other people that don't get that opportunity.
Yeah.
So I'm also with a roof over my head, food to eat, the infinite possibilities today is going to provide, as well as challenges that I'm going through. Because I sense change is definitely on the horizon, so to speak. I can see it, the change is close than further than being further away. Either way, in my life or in the world, I sense it in both. And I'm grateful to be around to see that. So it's my gratitude.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you. Yeah, I'm always grateful for my indoor plumbing, my food, and a refrigerator that works for the most part. Typically fresh food, although this morning there was a head of broccoli that had begun to go bad because it was hidden in the back of the drawer at the bottom of the refrigerator. It's my fault. Um, but just to get up every day and address things that are important to me and occasionally get paid for doing it. And that, that's the one place I always have had to continue working on. Um, but I'm aware that um, the life I have is puts me in a category, and I don't have a lot of money, and as a Catholic school teacher and then a poet, I've never made a lot of money, but I'm better off than 90 something percent of the people on the planet, and that's not lost on me.
Mm.
So I'm just really grateful for the food, the running water, drinkable water, and just the basic necessities being met every day.
That's good. That's great, actually. I feel you on that. I concur. So, with that being said, what do you say is going to be our topic for discussion today?
Yeah. So, as always, we're talking about the concept in the book "Healing America's Narratives." The subtitle is "The Feminine, the Masculine, and Our Collective National Shadow." We're exploring the part of the United States, both history and current events, that has been denied by many millions of people. We're not saying the United States is a bad country. We're saying that we have to look at all of it in order to nurture it back to health. So specifically today, we're going to really work in the current events. And I've said this before, I don't like to spend too much time talking about Donald Trump. Um, he's a presidential candidate. He was a president, but for a lot of reasons, he gets a lot of attention. He has to be covered as a candidate and as an indicted person in both civil and criminal cases. But I want to speak specifically today in this larger context of the shadow of the United States about his relationship with what I'll loosely call the Christian right, but I'm speaking about the leadership of the evangelical Christians. And that's not every Christian or every evangelical, but it's a large number of them. And the organizations and the families that fund them and that funded each of his presidential runs, 2016, 2020, and now again in 2024. So very, very briefly, back in the 2016 presidential election, Dr. Ben Carson, who was a brilliant pediatric neurosurgeon, Marco Rubio, Ted Cruz, and Mike Huckabee were the four men who had the most welcoming Christian right bona fides. The Christian right liked them because they were, publicly good Christian men who leaned to the right. And one by one, they fell by the wayside in the primaries. And Jeb Bush, who was more of a moderate, was the desired candidate for the moderate Republicans. The main, what at the time you could have called the mainstream Republicans back in 2016, before this MAGA thing exploded. And Bush, he didn't have the chops, even though he had a brother and a president who were a brother and a father who were presidents. So Donald Trump was left. And I was going to read something, just a sentence or two really quickly. When it came time, when the Christian right realized that Donald Trump was going to be the Republican candidate, many of them wanted nothing to do with him because of his various divorces, because of his comments in that trailer when he was speaking to Billy Bush and others and making all the comments about how he could grab women whenever he wanted to because he was a celebrity.
Entertainment Tonight trailer,
yeah, and other things I just didn't like about him. But after all of the other candidates fell by the wayside, there's a man by the name of, and I always lose his first name when I talk about him. Is it James? Yeah, James Robeson, who is a televangelist and a pretty powerful guy in the background of the far right in the United States. And Ben Carson, who knew Robeson pretty well, he supported Robeson, Robeson supported him. Ben Carson said to Robeson, and this is a quote, that I agree to spend I would, endorse Trump if Trump, quote, agrees to spend extensive time with Robeson alone. And it has to start with a private meeting of at least an hour, and then it must continue on and on and on. That's the end of the quote. So that meeting took place in April of 2016. And over the ensuing months, various organizations tied into the Christian right, the Council for National Policy, the Watchman on the Wall, the Heritage Foundation, the NRA, the Family Research Council, various radio network groups, the Federalist Society, and many more, along with the Koch, DeVos, and Prince families, put their money behind Donald Trump. And basically, it was a quid pro quo. Trump had no background as a moderate right or even far right Christian. He was raised, his family were Christians, but he had no background publicly of going to church or reading the Bible or any of that. And if anything, he was moderate, slightly left in his politics, other than when it came to taxes back in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. All right. But what he got with their funding was millions of dollars that allowed him to continue to build his brand publicly, the Trump brand. He didn't really expect to become president. And what they got was his agreement, because he didn't really have an agenda as a president, was his agreement to make their agenda his agenda should he get elected. And their agenda included conservative judiciary appointments, and they're doing very well with that. He appointed many judges during his presidency, working to ban same-sex marriage, working to convert homosexuals because they saw sexuality as a choice, working to overturn Roe v. Wade, which they effectively have succeeded at, but it's an ongoing fight, working to protect gun rights, and working to limit the role of the federal government and strengthen the role of states in terms of governing in the United States. And he did a really good job with that as president. He put forth their agenda. In many ways, he was very successful at it. Last thing I'll say, and this was in the news this week, Trump is now selling Bibles through his Truth Social website. And he said this, and I'm only laughing because it's so obvious what it is, and many millions of Americans buy into it. Quote, "All Americans need a Bible in their home, and I have many." That's Donald Trump, end quote. Goes on to say, "It's my favorite book. It's a lot of people's favorite book." Last quote. Quote, "Religion and Christianity are the biggest things missing from this country, and I truly believe that we need to bring them back. It's one of the biggest problems we have. That's why our country is going haywire. We've lost religion in our country," end quote. All right. So that's him pandering to the followers of the people who are funding his presidential campaign yet again. Journalists have dug deep. There's no evidence of any strong Christian moral fiber in Donald Trump's adult life since he, moved out on his own and became the president of the Trump Corporation after his father died, or before his father died, actually. So it's this ongoing act, and it's an attempt to shift the country back towards to make it into a Christian nation and more of an autocracy where democratic rule basically gets eroded. And as Mike Johnson, the Speaker of the House, has said, his worldview is a worldview of the Bible. And God basically wants the United States to be a Christian nation. God wants that. And they know that somehow. So that's actually dangerous, as even though I laugh at some of this because it's so ludicrous in many ways, but it's very real. And it's part of that shadow of the United States, the collective shadow, which include traits such as ignorance. God wants us to be a Christian nation. That's just ignorant to say that. Or if you know it's not true and you say it anyway, that's arrogance. That's the second trait. And then there's fear of other people who aren't white Christians getting their equal share of rights and opportunities in the United States. And then there's bigotry, and there's violence, and there's greed, and there's excess, there's untrustworthiness, and there's bullying. So all of those are the traits that we've been talking about for almost 2 years now. So that's our topic. It's current. It gives this Trump guy more attention than I want to give him, but it's important for us to say these things out loud in as many ways as we can to make sure that we can continue to shift the viewpoints of people whose minds still can be changed. And I think that's very important. So I'll shut up now.
Well, again, gratitude for choosing another great topic, timely and important. So definitely warrants a discussion, particularly in the context of being fully human. And as we really talk about, that's really the solution, the path, the way that we're gonna not go into extinction is by becoming and seeing each other as few human beings that we need to connect with. But what I also got from your account, which you laid out, is that, number one, Trump is really a fascinating guy, though. I'm not saying it as a compliment, but just really as a observation. To be able to do all the things that he does. I mean, he dominates news cycles. He's dominated news cycles ever since he rode down the escalator and said he was going to run for president. Since then, he's dominated the news cycle pretty much every day. He gets mentioned. He's the talk of monologues. He's totally taking control over the Republican Party. He He's been impeached twice. I mean, he's done things that no other person has done, let alone, president. And getting still, he's dealing about 9 lawsuits, still has the energy to go to rallies and speak. And just watching this whole thing, it's like he's, just to be simpler way of looking at it, like he's the true definition and personification of what white supremacy looks like, and all its splendor, as they say, because he shows that he's able to do everything he's doing. Everybody knows it's criminal, and he's not in jail. Not only is he not in jail, he's running for president. That's like no one would have thought this before, because we all believe that the systems were going to be in place and no person could really be in that position, that the systems would take care of that person. And they're attempting to a certain extent, but it's like he's tapping to a base of people who have been overlooked, neglected, and share this with this. And this is one of the things that I believe that most people need to be more conscious and aware of the behavior of people who are in survival mode, because it's almost like it's almost at a level. I know some people are going to be offended by it, but I look for ways to just make associations so that I can make decisions as quickly as possible. But it's almost as close to a drug addict, because dealing with someone who, and I was reading the book Focus by Dr. Daniel Goleman. And he talks about a Harvard University study that he cites that's referred to as the neurobiology of frazzled. And he refers to these people as frazzled, as being a state of mind where you're just constantly under stress, you're constantly overwhelmed, you're constantly in anger or anxiety, but you can't see the objective. You can't focus on what you do to empower yourself or better your situation, because all your thoughts are about what you feel is hurting you. And so that's where your thoughts are, is how this was painful to me, this was stressful to me, this is all I'm thinking about. And my point is, you got, and the systems we have in place, as we talked about before, has positioned folks that if you're not rich white men, and you're not have your own system, you're gonna pretty much be at the mercy of the systems, and the systems designed to make you, as Noam Chomsky talks about, give away your consent, and be just the working class. So Trump has came out and spoke directly to that audience, to that base, and he aligned himself with that base, so much so that base, who they felt has not been represented for years, definitely not at that kind of power president level. So now they got someone that says, I understand you, and they are, and the same thing is similar to black folks. Folks who are in that survival mode, who are frazzled, are going to be motivated only by a leader who claims that they can solve their problems. That's what they're going to attach to and connect with. And that's what Trump is being able to build his base with. And I think Trump really studied that. I don't know if it was his team, but that's what Democrats have done for years. That's what they were able to do. Like, I think Obama, if he had wanted to, could have came out and did similar things. I'm going to sell Bibles, because, he was selling hope, and people were buying into the hope. So he's making it about everybody else. But he clearly makes it about himself. And he's honest with that. Anything I'm doing is going to definitely benefit me first. And if some people, if the U.S. benefits it as well, then yeah, okay, so be it. But my agenda, my reason for doing this is because it benefits me. So I know I just say a lot of things there, but that's where I constantly focus on, is really understanding the behaviors of what makes people give away their consent and agree to elect people constantly. And like I said, when people in survival mode, I realize the behaviors are consistent regardless of the color of the person's skin. So whether it's, I see people in Baltimore voting for mayors, choosing between one mayor that was mayor previously and the mayor currently that's running for office. So there's not going to be a change at all. And they're willing to accept that, to folks willing to vote for Biden and Trump again. And then folks who are willing to double down on Trump and say, well, I'm going to at least vote for him because I believe he brings about change. And it's just ridiculous to see how people, once they're locked into that leader, are not going to pivot, especially if the leader says they understand their pain.
Yeah. Yeah. And the irony is that, I mean, I love when you mentioned, you brought up Obama, both of them had difficult relationships with their father. I mean, Trump's father was somewhat intolerant and abusive, emotionally speaking, and Obama's father left. But Obama got out of Harvard Law and became a community organizer in Chicago. Trump went to Fordham, finished up at Penn, and just inherited his father's business. So they, early on, you could see the difference in the two men. But you're right. I mean, the audacity of hope. I mean, that was, Obama's, I don't know if it was his first or second book, but that actually reminds me, that's a good example, because Obama's a legitimate writer. He writes. I think one of the best measures of the impact of Donald Trump on another human being is from the guy who wrote The Art of the Deal. That was a book that has Trump's name on it back in 1987, I believe it came out. But Tony Schwartz, who was a New York-based journalist, he was writing, I think, for Newsweek at the time. Trump picked him to ghostwrite The Art of the Deal. So Schwartz basically shadowed him for 2 years, went to his meetings, did everything, was with him for 2 years. Trump split the advance for the book, which was something like $500,000 with Schwartz. And Schwartz, in fact, I'm going to read exactly what Schwartz said. He said, "I earned more in a few weeks than I had in the whole of my working life, giving me a financial cushion that few people are ever lucky enough to enjoy," end quote. But he then asked himself, why wasn't I happier? So he realized he spent these 2 years with Trump. The Art of the Deal came out. He got half of all the royalties in addition to half of the advance on the book. So he made a good deal of money, more than he was making as a journalist. He then spent the next 5 years of his life traveling across the United States, speaking with the likes of Ram Dass, Michael Murphy, Elmer and Alice Green, Betty Edwards, Herbert Benson, who was a founder of the Relaxation Response, wrote that book, John Kabat-Zinn, Dean Ornish, Joseph Goldstein, Jack Kornfield, Helen Palmer, Ken Wilber, and others. So those are all people who are at the cutting edge of human studies. I can say more about any one of them if you want, but I don't need to say that right now. And the book that Schwartz wrote next, after spending 2 years with Trump and writing The Art of the Deal, he spent 5 years talking to men and women at the cutting edge of human development and research. And he wrote a book entitled What Really Matters: Searching for Wisdom in America. So the impact, Tony Schwartz, successful journalist writing for Newsweek, had a couple of young kids at the time, happy in his job, gets this opportunity, makes a lot of money dealing with Trump, and then realizes he's not happy because he made a lot of money, and goes and searches for wisdom in America. So I just think there's a cause and effect there, that the impact that spending 2 years watching Donald Trump do what he does sent this guy on a 5-year journey to find wisdom and find himself. And his book holds up. I mean, it came out in 95, so it's dated now. Some of the people he interviewed are now dead. But they were Buddhist teachers. They were, Ken Wilber's the founder of Integral Theory and Practice. Elmer and Alice Green were the pioneers in biofeedback. And then there's others. So it's just, he found these wise people who were willing to talk to him, and wrote a wonderful book. Again, a little bit dated now because it's a quarter of a century old, 30 years old, but not without its merit. So, and then all of the people who are on Trump's team and who have left, they just said they're just walking away once they saw what was really happening. It's in the hundreds of people, that were with him in the administration or indirectly impacted by it. Republican people in Congress are all stepping aside. They're opening up their seats before their terms are over. So, it's and yes, what you said, he's able to get away with all this. He has the energy to do all of this. So it's quite a problem. And as was said about Hitler, as was said about Genghis Khan, as was said about anyone who did massive damage at scale, can't do it without people who are willing to follow you.
I learned so much when I do the podcast with you. You turn me on so many different things. And I also see how things circle back around where alignment shares as well. Because, my introduction to Tony Schwartz, I didn't know that history of Tony Schwartz. I was turned on to him by a book that he wrote called The Power of Full Engagement.
Yeah.
Which I love. So I read that book. He was the only person I read that talked about managing energy, not managing time.
Yep.
And that to me was definitely radical and definitely something that was a paradigm shift in my thinking. So to hear where that thought process came from, or what journey he went on to put him at that level, and those experts he was able to, learn from, and create a whole institute around peak performance and becoming a person who talks about how to really, get your body to achieve the optimal level. So you're right. It's kind of like almost similar to those stories of the guy who built the Nobel Peace Prize named after the gentleman who built a bomb and was able to, have that shift come along, and now he's remembered society with this. So that was interesting. That Tony Schwartz said he's not going to, even though he was, as you mentioned, very successful with Trump's getting 50% of the royalties from the art of the deal. He didn't want that to be his legacy. So I'm not going to let this be my legacy and just ride out as someone I'm going to really use that funding to do greater things. So that's really interesting. Growth mindset as well. Yeah. So again, somebody showing you an example of what it means to be fully human. As we go through these different stages in our lives, these different transitions, you hope, as Carl Jung talks about those 4 archetypes. You hope to go through each of those archetypes, from starting off with the athlete to the warrior, then to the statesman, then spirit. You hope to transition mentally, maturity wise, to each of those 4 archetypes at some point in your life. And the sooner you can do that, the better you are. Like, I like to believe I'm on a transition to the spirit one, because, and you've made this statement before, several quotes you said that I can't say verbatim, but I remember the context, meaning that when you are to the point where or I guess a better way to say it would be, I think it was Deepak Chopra said, when you reach a point where every living thing ceases to feel your presence. You've reached that level where you're vibrating energy wise at that level. And that's a level, obviously, when you're on the path to becoming fully human, you study to become. But one other thing that interesting that I left out when I mentioned Obama was, my point of bringing Obama up in that context was to say that Obama understood that, again, to get those folks who are in survival mode, you gotta be charismatic.
Mhm.
You have to be a person that they can follow. And like you say, he was a community leader. He could have, when he's running for president, I don't think he can have that ability right now to galvanize that kind of interest, definitely from, and not as strong as he would. Like Obama's at a point where he could have got people to do anything he wanted to when he's running for office. Trump has been able to sustain his connection to his people because I think he ties it to, and you let me know if I'm wrong on your thoughts about this. He ties it to anger, and anger is that strong emotion that if I can connect with you, if we can connect on an emotional level, we can find an emotion that we have in common, then that's a great connection that you and I will share.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, I would say there's fear there too, because he's telling, he basically, it's a message of fear that these people, meaning anybody that's not a Trump supporter, want to take the country away from you, and they're communists and socialists and all immigrants and name it. It has a whole list of enemies. So there's the juxtaposition. I agree with anger and also fear. Um, and he just as a guy, he's now selling Bibles for $60, not including tax and shipping. And he has it's the Donald Trump, Lee Greenwood, the country singer who wrote God Bless the USA, I think is the name of the song. And I don't know where Greenwood is politically, if he's a Trump supporter or not, but I know that song is being used. But it's all it's this Christianity based on excluding people, insulting people, and inciting violence against people. That's the Christianity that Trump is putting out there. And the evangelicals who continue to fund him are willing to stay behind that kind of a message. In fact, one of them said, and I forget who actually said this, I'm not going to look it up right now, but at one of their public meetings, they said, obviously, Donald Trump is not a man of God, but he's an instrument of God. He's God's wrecking ball. I mean, this is from an adult who's ordained as a priest or as a preacher or pastor in some denomination of Christianity, saying that out loud in public. He's not a man of God. He's an instrument of God. He's God's wrecking ball. And he's going to basically wreck democracy so we can be in charge again. That's good in that it's being said out loud. It's bad because not enough people seem to be taking the threat seriously, in my opinion.
Yeah, because most people believe that because they're in a minority, that they're not going to be successful. So that's what most people, they live in that world of false comfort, believing that. But also, I think it's something that's really interesting is that I think that's really just more hype than everything else. Because, prior to Trump coming to power, because he got more than just in the office, he came to power. It was like there was before Trump and there's after Trump. That's how you got to look at the whole Republican Party now, because what he's done to it. What's interesting is the fact that prior to him coming to power, as I was saying, is that everything was focused on 99% and 1%. And so people were really getting connected and agreeing, and documentaries being made, was being mentioned constantly by the media. Occupy Wall Street movement came along. So folks were really beginning to start to see that these billionaire class and the wealth disparity and the wealth gap, like this something has to be done about this. Yeah. And all of a sudden, Trump comes up, and it's no longer, that's not the number one conversation that most people are having any longer. Now they're having a conversation about race and what's different between people and white supremacy, and keeping that foremost and forefront. And what's losing out again is the billionaires are still getting richer and more successful, and the 1% is growing, and the 99% is getting less resources. So Trump is doing that. They threw Trump out there to be, as they say, you from New York, or you definitely have roots in New York, so you're familiar with the game Three Card Molly. They're playing Three Card Molly with people like, look at Trump over here, and this is where you need to put your energy at while we do this over here.
Yeah.
And that's what I really see is really happening. So as you talk about the Christian white Christian powerful elites that have the finances, they're doing it for that reason. Like, you stay over here, like you said, we have our agenda. Here's the things we need you to accomplish. By the same token, you keep everybody off us. Keep everyone's attention, the media, all that's off us, because now everybody's gonna be talking about you and focus on these little small issues that really don't matter at the end of the day. COVID showed everybody that. See, I thought we would leave COVID with a much better. You would have thought that after COVID, we should at least walk away with having universal health care. It's in our best interest that everybody has access to health care, so there's not even if a person's homeless, he shouldn't be walking around with COVID, because it can spread. We can all get it from that one homeless person. So why not make sure that person can be treated? It's in our own best interest, if nothing else. If our own humanity doesn't see the value of loving other people to the point where they should be taken care of health wise, then selfishly do it so that you don't get impacted by that person's health issues. And we still didn't. They were able to shift that and now put everything on COVID on being about the vaccine, all those things. Now that's COVID's legacy in our lexicon, is whether people were vaccinated or not, as opposed to how quickly it spread and how we all were subject to it, and how people died from it, and people we knew close were dying from it. It's funny, again, going back to, I just mentioned Noam Chomsky and manufacturing consent, because all this just gets shifted constantly by the media. So this is what I want you to think about. This is what's important to you, and now we can't do critical thinking to now really understand what we should be doing to take away the fact that the wealth is still going to the 1% folks who control everything, and we continue to control most things as the way the world is structured.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot in there, but I agree. And the one thing you said about COVID, the reason that COVID wasn't a powerful enough force to get us to have universal health care, I think, because the Trump administration basically just assumed that enough individual households have bleach at home, and they don't really need universal health care. They can just inject themselves with bleach, and that will solve the problem. I mean, so I say that tongue in cheek, but this is the type of little thing, little in quotation marks. So Ron Klain, who was in the Obama administration, I forget his exact role in the Obama administration, but he became Joe Biden's chief of staff. It was Joe Biden's first chief of staff. And on the way out, the Obama administration, Barack Obama asked Klain to write a small handbook about threats to the country for the next president. And this is available online. In fact, I cite it in the book. I don't have it in my memory. But basically in that, Klain, basically wrote a handbook that said, okay, terrorism, this, that, other countries. The thing that the next administration needs to focus on is preparation for a global pandemic, And it was very, very specific. And what the Trump administration did in their first 6 months, maybe in the first 6 weeks, was they shut down parts of the presence of the, there's part of the White House that has a science portal to it. I forget what it's called. They removed all of the public information about science. They ignored the handbook, which you could read. Anybody hearing this, you can go online and find it. Google Ron Klain handbook. I forget what the title is. And the Trump administration basically dismissed it as that's just some Obama stuff. And that's just one more example. The litany of things that were done through arrogance, incompetence, ignorance. I mean, pick one. I think they had all of them working. Untrustworthiness for sure. is enormous. A lot of people in this country would have died from the coronavirus, regardless of who the president was. No doubt about it. Happened in every country. There's a strong argument that many died because Trump denied it at first, didn't want the country to panic, and it actually said out loud that it was just another Democratic hoax. As the president. So if I say that in a bar drinking with my friends, it's stupid, but it's not going to change too much. When the president of the United States makes a comment like that, or when a pope comments on abortion or contraception, it's a much more powerful statement because of the office. And Trump relentlessly, even now, I mean, he'll say something today that's just going to be wrong and ridiculous. And tens of millions of Americans will, in fact, believe him. And as you said, a lot of us think that they are a minority. They are a minority. But the only way that Trump definitely loses is if everyone in this country who's eligible registers to vote and votes. It has to happen. He lost by about 3 million votes first time, 2016. You won the Electoral College. He lost by about 8 million votes the second time, 2020. And he'll win, but he'll lose by more this time because people see more. I mean, more and more sane people who were members of the Republican Party are running away from it. And they're coming out and saying out loud, you can't vote for a third party candidate because you don't like Democrats. You have to vote for Biden because a Trump presidency will destroy the country. He began. So these are Republicans saying this out loud. So it's no time to take the moral high ground and say, well, I'm going to vote for Cornel West, who I admire, right? Robert Kennedy Jr., who I don't admire anymore. Because all they'll do, Cornel West will take votes away from Biden. Robert F. Kennedy Jr., it might be like a wash because he'll take some of the conspiracy people away from Trump. And he'll, probably take some people who remember his father and uncle away from Biden. But it's not a laughing matter. I wish it were, because there's some things that are just so ludicrous. But it's not funny at all, and it's just really very dangerous because more things from 2025 forward for the next president. Whether it's a pandemic, whether it's terrorism, whether it's Russia, whether it's domestic unrest, whether it's, you name it. You want a relatively sane, knowledgeable person who knows how to govern, not just campaign, at the helm. Donald Trump is not that person. Never has been, never will be. That's just my opinion.
Well, we don't disagree with that politically. Again, I begrudgingly, I'm going to vote for Biden, and for all the reasons you stated, and I see that, but I think that again, it's the part that I've shared this each week. I found a song by Bob Marley, and that's why he's considered to be a prophet, because he talked about this over 30, 40, 50 years ago. He had a song. I'll name the song after I read the lyrics, to show you how I think that there's a large group of people who relates to this song. And I'm only going to read the first two verses of the song, I should say. And this really, to me, encompasses their feelings. And this is why the systems have beat these people down to the point, to quote Fannie Lou Hamer, it's sick and tired of being sick and tired.
Yeah.
But the song goes, this morning I woke up in a curfew. Oh God, I was a prisoner too. Could not recognize the faces stand over me. They were all dressed in uniforms with brutality. How many rivers do we have to cross before we get to talk to the boss? After all that we got, it seems that we have lost. We must have really paid the cost. And this is Obviously, before this is, I guess, during the Carter Reagan administration, that he made this. So most people still facing that kind of, or believe in that kind of mindset that this, I don't really have anything here. That's why I said before, you and I both are privileged that we can say we want to keep our current, you know, way of life and still have it the other people can come behind us. And because the way things are now, even though there's injustice being practiced, we all know at the end of the day that if you really apply yourself, anybody can. It hasn't always been the case, obviously, but it's relative now more so than ever. Anyone who just really puts their mind to it and really puts forth an effort, you can be successful. Is it going to be easy? No. If, and I definitely truly believe this, if you're black, it's going to be far harder than if you're white. Obviously, if you're a black female, it's going to be far harder than if you're a black male or a black or a white male and a white female as well. But it's still possible. It's still achievable, and that's what we don't want to lose. And the right Christian right winning can mean that even that could be snuffed out. That opportunity, that possibility for anyone that can just put their mind to it and just make it be successful. And that's one of the great things really about America. America has grown to that. I think the biggest thing that America doesn't do is America doesn't tout that. Now, I mean, of course, that's written in the Constitution that everyone has the pursuit of happiness, so to speak. But that's not the Constitution. That's what's the pursuit of happiness? That term, is that the Constitution or is that the?
I believe it's in the Declaration of Independence.
Declaration of Independence, correct. Thank you. But my point I'm going with.
I hope that's right.
No, you're right. I know it's definitely the Constitution. That's why I had to think about that. But I believe you're right. But my point is, that's been written in the Declaration of Independence, but it's not been equally applied. And I believe now more than any other time, it can be equally applied. Is it going to be some injustice? Yes, but it still can be if you put your mind to it. I see more people coming from my community that are successful despite racism and everything than it was when I was younger. You know what I'm saying? I'm seeing my friends I grew up with, their children going to college and their children having a much better life than their parents who are my age had. So I see that there is change that happened and more opportunities there. I just kind of wish that we could talk more about it and people wouldn't focus so much on what's wrong as opposed to focus on what we can do and get things done. So I think if more people were, and I'm saying all this to sum it up, to say if more people were benefiting from the system, then I think more people would turn out to vote for Biden, and it should be a wash. You would think that because it seems clear that at the very least, Biden is not representing racism and bigotry to the extent that Trump's, to me, agenda is. Even though I don't think Trump is, I definitely believe his constituents are, and the people who want him to win definitely are racist and want to control and keep white privilege and white supremacy in practice and in place as a dominant system. And so voting for Republican would be voting to support that. It's not longer about being a conservative values and with this person, the arguments of abortion, gun rights, and all those, I think are relative, but I don't think that's why people vote for Trump, because the gun rights are gonna be held in. At least majority of people I'm talking to who are black who are voting for Trump, they believe that garbage. That I'm gonna protect my Second Amendment rights and I'm gonna, I'm more conservative, but at the end of the day, they're gonna lose and they don't realize that it's clearly.
Yeah, I agree with that. The last thing you said, I mean, not just the last thing, but it's the leadership of the Christian right. All those organizations I mentioned, from the NRA's kind of activist political action branch to the Heritage Foundation to the Council for National Policy, it's the leadership that has those agendas. The people are just doing what they're told, basically. But it's the political leadership of those Christian right organizations and wealthy families that have those 5 or 6 agenda items that Trump actually did a good job pursuing in his 4 years in office. They overturned, Roe v. Wade, which nobody thought was going to happen. I shouldn't say nobody, but most people just, in the last years, just took that for granted. A lot of young women and men, just that was the world they were born into. That abortion was a right, and that's a complicated issue for a lot of reasons. Which, but that's just one example that the money Trump received in exchange for pursuing the Christian right agenda paid off for them in many ways. They're still not a ban on assault weapons. The folks, Nicole Hockley and Mark Barden are still appearing in ads relentlessly every day asking for more signatures. They're the folks that founded Sandy Hook Promise. They both lost their sons, in the Sandy Hook massacre back in 2012. So it's, that's what would Jesus do if you're going to be a Christian? Jesus would say, yeah, we need more assault weapons. Come on. This is where and then there are people, articulate, educated people who would have an answer to that, to what I just said, defending the Second Amendment and the right to bear arms based in their beliefs. Because it's, guns that kill people, not people. It's people that kill people, not guns. And that, this is the country that God wants to be a Christian country. And it's as though the Constitution, like the Bible, is sacred scripture, and it has to be taken at face value and not questioned. And that's just idiocy, because nobody knows who wrote what we call the Old Testament, with the Jewish scriptures. There's some ideas, but nobody really knows the actual authors. And the authors of the New Testament, the Christian scriptures, the Gospels and Epistles, were written several decades after the death of Christ. So they didn't record it on their smartphones or their hard drives. These were some guys, with the exception of the Gospel according to Mary Magdalene. These were some guys who were just remembering stuff. And then Constantine, when he saw the power of Catholicism at the Council of Trent, they decided, okay, here's the stories we'll allow the people to continue to read. And then they got rid of the other ones. So it was even hand selected. And the versions that we read nowadays have been translated through at least 2 different languages. And people call it the Word of God. Well, I hope the translators knew what they were doing. There's so many flaws in it. And I grew up Catholic. I taught in Catholic schools. I'm not in any way mocking the message of love one another, that those among you without sin cast the first stone. There's some really good lessons there. But nowhere does it say, and 2,000 years into the future, God will want the United States of America to be a Christian nation. It doesn't say that anywhere. So it's a frightening reliance on myth and allegory, which has some value when read as myth and allegory. But when it's the literal truth, it becomes pretty dangerous.
Again, going back to the prophet Bob Marley, he said that, preacher man don't tell me heaven is under the earth. I know you don't know what life is really worth. And so again, he's, to your point, that manufacturing consent, getting people to accept and believe. What's really interesting to me is I think most people just enjoy being lazy. I think the majority of people, when I say lazy, what I mean by it's not challenging the narrative of what's been told. Willing to accept whatever is easier that fits their identity. And too lazy to say, I'm going to challenge that because I need to sit here and make sure this makes sense to me. This is going to determine who I am and how I behave for the rest of my life.
Yep.
You know, and that's and that's a sad thing because the evidence is there, documentaries are there, all the different podcasts discussing it. So it's not like it's secret and underground that the media controls us. Everybody knows that by now. We see that. The internet is information overload to the point where they fill it with so much information, then they tell you, well, we're gonna give you a playlist and give you suggestions, notifications on what you should watch because it's information overload. I make this point real quick. I remember when when DVDs used to be sold, I consider myself, because I love movies, a DVD collector. And I had my first 4 DVDs that I had purchased. I can quickly choose, which movie I wanted to watch in less than a minute. I want to watch this movie. When it got to the point where I had over 200 DVDs, I could spend an hour looking through DVDs and couldn't find which one I wanted to watch. And I hated that, right? It's too many options. Just, I don't know what to watch. And now it's even worse than that. Now we got all these different streaming channels. So we think we want more options. That's what people believe, but you really don't. You really want 1, 2, or 3. If you got an elevator and it had 180 buttons, you're getting off. I'm not catching this elevator. You know what I'm saying? So that's the problem. I think people are lazy in that context. And I want to shift this right into how do we go about giving those individual solutions so they can start being lazy and look for ways to shift the narratives, and we can be more cognitive and conscious on how to fight this movement that's going on that you laid out.
Yeah, that's a big question, and there's not a simple answer to it. I mean, the underlying characteristic that's, I would say, is required is a desire to get to the truth, a desire for truth. A trait that can lead to that is a genuine sense of curiosity. And you and I have been speaking for almost 2 years about cultural givens, and that's what Marley was challenging in his lyrics. Not just that, but the idea of here's what's given to us, and are you able to see with your own eyes whether it's true or not, and do you even care? And I'm not trying to paraphrase. God, I do a bad job with that. But you have to want to get to the truth, and for that to be a worthwhile endeavor, you cannot have a predisposed idea of what the truth is. Because if you're predisposed and you're just looking for, confirmation bias, you're doomed basically. Oh, these people are saying things that I kind of agree with already, so that's where the truth must lie. And your score 0 on that one because it's not going to work. There's a reason that Robert Keegan called the developmental move was a move from, and there are 2 of them, from the imperial mind, which is the mind that knows it's right and takes myth as truth. It just takes whatever it's given and doesn't really try to operate on it or interrogate it at all. You graduate from there when you do begin to question some things, but you're still a victim of the culture and the social. He called that socialized mind. You think you're operating as an individual, but you're really just operating according to what the culture gives you. And then the important move, now they're all important because they're developmental, but the next move is called the self-authoring mind. So from imperial, where it's just imperialistic, it's forced upon me and I just take it, to socialized, where I think I'm doing some work, but I'm still socialized by the culture, what Thomas Merton called the anonymous authority of the collectivity. And then there's the self-authoring mind, where I'm able to see, okay, there's that story and that story and that story. What's my story? So I get curious and I begin to explore. And that's getting into your, I think, perfect critique. If you're lazy, you're not going to do the exploration. As you were talking about the choices inherent in having 200 DVDs, I was looking over my shoulder and saying, if I just had 2 books to read. So it's true with anything, but the difference is, like, I've read 95, 96% of what's behind me and what's over there. I read the books I buy. And I learn from them. Some I disagree with, some I agree with. And that's, nobody yet knows why some people make that move from socialized to self-authoring, and there's moves beyond that as well, and why some people don't. Um, but that's the move, because if you're believing myth as truth, if you're taking an allegory and thinking it's literally true, if you think you can understand the Constitution as the way the founders wrote it, and it has to stay that way, you're completely deluded, because you didn't grow up with the founders and you weren't subject to their cultural givens and their conditions. So some of it is willful ignorance, a willful blindness, or, invincible ignorance, where you're able to find out more, but you don't choose to. And then there's some, in small cases, that are invincible ignorance. That's language from moral philosophy. If you're invincibly ignorant, there's no way you could have known the truth in this moment about whatever it happens to be. That's true with kids, usually, younger people. But a lot of folks seem to be willfully blind or vincibly ignorant. In other words, you could find out if you wanted to, you just don't bother. Until we find the magic potion that makes willful blindness and vincible ignorance unsatisfying, we'll still have people who believe that myths are literally true. And so I would say, interrogate your beliefs. That's the step. All right, I believe this, and this. Okay, take them one at a time. Why do I believe this? Well, because of this, and this. Okay, let's go look at this, and this. And just keep on doing that. It has to be an iterative process, where you take it to a point where you have some evidence of its truth or lack of evidence of its truth. Then you can begin to shift. Oh man, I really thought that was true. Maybe it's not. Shit. I believe in that. I've been believing that for a long time. Who am I really if the beliefs I've based my life upon are really not true? That's a great question that Isabel Wilkerson raised. She's not the first person to ask that question, but she raised it really clearly in her book, Cast. Wow. If everything I've always believed isn't true, what is true and who am I really? If whites aren't superior to everybody else, if Christian whites are not the superior religion and race, and I'm Christian and white, who am I? What's my life really about? That's a terrifying question to move into. So it's a lot of work, and it's scary work to do, and it needs to be done. That was kind of a rant, I know.
Well, no, it was a clear solution or steps to take. The main thing that I want people to take away from that is action has to be taken.
Yeah,
and that's the main point is, what are you putting your action, your energy into doing? I think it's because maybe I'm 50 now that I'm saying that this is the only option and the most pressing, urgent option. Maybe if I was in my 20s and 30s, I wouldn't see it that way. So maybe it is a wisdom kicking in to say, you understand that when you're younger, you see things being unjust and wrong, but you don't know how to change it. You just know that you will do things. You will try to change. You have the energy to try to change. You have the ignorance also to put forth action in any direction you can. When you get older, though, it takes more thought to put forth action because you realize there's consequences to action. And a lot of folks don't want some of those consequences, so you got to put forth more thought to think about what's the best action I can take that brings about the least minimal consequences or trade-offs that I can understand and accept. So with that being said, we've reached the end of our show, or the main show, and we're at the point where now, as we conclude, we're going a little over, we still want to give examples of people who we believe are displaying or has displayed the fully human characteristics and behaviors. So I'm going to go first and mention a person that came up during our offline conversation. Because I want to make sure I give him his flowers during our live show, and that's Mel Brooks.
Hmm.
I saw the History of the World Part 1 when I was a kid. I never saw anything like that. And to this day, I still haven't seen anything like that. Where during that time, I think it was the 80s, late 70s or early 80s,
I'm
when
not
it
sure.
came out.
Yeah.
And it had black people in it. It had race talked about, but it was joked about without being offensive to anybody. Talked about religion. It was sexist. It was all those things, but at the same time, it was a musical. It was teaching you something. It was education. It was informative because it talked about history and like I had never heard of the witch trials
Hmm.
and the Inquisition. It taught me about the Inquisition. I had never heard of that before. I saw that, so those things that I want to give Mel Brooks credit because he's somebody I believe that was again acting and behaving like a fully human being and seeing the need to say that if I'm going to make a movie or a musical, I need to include pretty much most of the population that's going to watch it so that they can at least see themselves represented in a positive light. He got great black actors to play his roles from Gregory Hines in the role that he played, and so it wasn't anything derogatory. It's not something that I don't want to watch now that I'm older and say that's going to be offensive. It's funny, it's extremely hilarious, and it's very entertaining. So to me, someone who would operate at that when and I hear Bill Maher always make this excuse and it kind of turned me off to him when he says, well, that was just the how everybody operated during that time. So you just kind of brush it off to say, well, everybody that was the culture then, so you don't hold any individual accountable for his racist actions. Mel Brooks was someone who stood up during a time when it was culturally okay or the cultural norm to be racist and prejudiced and bigoted and not display that in his movies. So to me, he's someone that I lift up as being a fully human individual.
Yeah. Yeah. That was, yeah, I love that choice. And he's still kicking. He's in his 90s. I mean, but a funny, talented guy. Yeah. Thanks for that one. Um, I'm going to mention, I don't think I've used this person before, but I've been aware of Carol Gilligan's work for some decades, but I've read it closely in the last decade, more closely in the last decade. Again, reread some earlier stuff, and her new book entitled "In a Human Voice" came out in late 2023, and she was Harvard educated. She worked at Harvard for a while. She's in her 80s, her late 80s, teaching down at NYU. But the focus of her research was on girls' development. And in later years, with some of her former students who are now researchers in their own right, the conversation is around both boys and girls' development. And she has some just views on patriarchy and gender and the acculturation, what we've been talking about, of boys and girls, where girls being acculturated to grow up to be good women, and boys being acculturated to grow up to be real men, and where that comes from and what it does to both groups over the course of their lifetimes. And it's just brilliant work and insightful, and it provides scholarly research behind what a lot of us who are trying to pay attention kind of intuit. And she kind of says, well, here's why, and here's what we know, because we've been doing these studies for over 40 years now. So Carol Gilligan would be, my fully human representative, for today's show.
Excellent choice. And it was thanks to you that I found out about Carol Gilligan. You mentioned Robert Keegan.
Yeah.
And I was able to Google and came up with a couple of videos I watched on YouTube that she's giving a lecture. So you were instrumental in helping me become knowledgeable about Carol. So as we wrap up our show, I want to thank everyone for listening again. Um, to our Fully Human Connections podcast to really understand the intent of our show is really to discuss what we see as modern times and then these false narratives that we live under, and do it in a way that's not just gossip but informative, and at the end with some positive action that you can take to help bring around the world, or create the world that you want to live in, and then leave you all with some examples of folks who are actually doing it. And today I think we've done it. I want to thank you, Reggie, for again choosing another great topic and being present and writing a book that you've written that sets this context for our whole discussion. And until next Wednesday at 10 a.m., everyone, please continue to be growth minded. Heed Reggie's suggestions, his action items. Let's all continue to find ways that we all can continue to be more fully human. Thank you.